Mais uma vez, muito bom dia a todos. Vamos ter que dar início à segunda parte desta sessão de apresentação das conclusões e recomendações da OCDE à política ambiente em Portugal. Antes de mais, quero dizer-me...
I would like to tell you that to me it is a double privilege to be here in this panel. The first privilege because I am working in the Ministry for the Environment for 20 years. It is the second exercise that I attend. I have been privileged because I have an outstanding team and also other leaders in the ministry who collaborate a lot because we never work alone in these exercises. The other privilege is because we are in Sintra. Sintra is really a very good host. I would like to thank the mayor and his team because we are welcome as family and we feel as family. Well, we had a global vision of the whole exercise made with many domains of the environmental policy in review. We were able to focus the very specific subject, the environmental matters, for 2012-2022 period. We had to start with the situation that arose from the impact of the exceptional measures taken after Troika, when after 2021 and the period that started at the end of the Troika period is still very disturbing, because by the end of 2021 and when we exchanged information with OECD, we were again forced to take into account the circumstances of the exceptional measures of the pandemic. After the final approval of the recommendations, we had to introduce a new disturbing factor in long-term strategies and policies with the invasion of Ukraine and its global consequences. In fact, according to the minister, and probably the next 10 years will not be different. We tried to be original during the debate. So we organized this discussion about environmental challenges of the Portuguese strategies to face crisis situations. There is a need to design correctly all the measures that help citizens and companies to overcome crisis conditions and to understand its exceptional and finite character. The behavioral consequences can also influence production and consumption. With this discussion, we aim to understand if it's possible to draw conclusions, trying to explain and explore the positive things and to avoid the negative consequences. In order to speak about this subject, we invited 3 speakers. I start by passing on the floor to Frederic from the OECD office. Thank you, Federico. Oh, Frederic, sorry.
Thank you, Alexandra. Dear Minister, dear Mayor, dear colleagues, to what extent is Portugal's response to the COVID and then to the energy crisis aligned with its environmental and climate goals? I would like to present selected elements of our report on this issue with updated information since its finalization. So I would like to talk first about the Portugal's Recovery and Resilience Plan, and then about measures taken to cushion the impact of higher energy prices. works. So Portugal has a small service-based economy that grew steadily between 2013 and 2019. The country was among the OECD economies most strongly hit by the pandemic, but it has been recovering fast since mid-2021. Activity has been constantly supported by policy measures and rebounded markedly when restrictive measures were lifted. Strong private consumption growth and a rebound in tourism supported GDP growth in 2022. Yet, the pace of the recovery has slowed. Real GDP growth is projected to decline from 6.7% in 2022 to 1% in 2023 and 1.2% in 2024. As part of its response to the COVID crisis, Portugal's Recovery and Resilience Plan will boost its economy with next-generation EU funds in addition to cohesion funds. The RRP promotes the green transition. It could raise GDP by up to 2.4% by 2026. Portugal devoted 38% of its RRP budget to the climate objectives. It rightly focuses on improving energy efficiency, the part in green in the graph, and putting energy efficiency first is crucial to meet the climate objectives, but also to cushion the adverse impact of higher energy prices. However, Portugal needs to accelerate implementation. The country has made progress. It is among the 5 EU countries to have received a second payment under the Recovery and Resilience Facility. But the latest government reports mention delays in energy efficiency programs and in extending the Lisbon metro due to higher material prices. The absorption rate of EU funds in this area was already below average in the past decade. The graph shows the RRP allocations, and the blue part shows the amount paid. As of March 9, 10% of the allocations allocated 10% of the amounts allocated to the climate transition had been paid to the beneficiaries. So Portugal should redouble efforts to make the best use of EU funds in these areas. It should develop administrative capacities and streamline the public procurement system. It should also carefully assess the environmental impact of investments. Concerns have been raised on road networks extension, new dams in water-scarce areas, or on limited support for biodiversity. Russia's war against Ukraine has driven up energy and food prices. Energy prices have risen less in Portugal than in most EU countries due to its lower dependence on energy imports from Russia. Nevertheless, rising prices weigh on Portugal's economic growth prospect. Inflation is expected to remain high in 2023, but will moderate. So Portugal has taken strong action to cushion the impact of higher energy prices. This slide attempts to track the main initiatives since the end of 2021. It includes measures announced until December 2022 after our report was finalized. So I know you think there are too many things on this slide, but it's just to show the large number of measures implemented. These measures include financial transfer to households and businesses and price support, such as the reduction of the tax on petroleum products or the freeze of the carbon tax. Other measures support fuel consumption in public transport, road transport, agriculture, or gas-intensive industries. Portugal and Spain were also granted a temporary exemption by the European Commission to cap the gas price to reduce the price of electricity. Overall, these measures have been estimated at over 4% of 2021 GDP, a level comparable to the EU average. This includes resources spent and revenue foregone. Like other OECD and European countries, Portugal has focused on energy price support measures. These measures account for about 2/3 of Portugal's total support and are largely untargeted. For example, out of the 2.4 billion euro budget of the Families First plan, 1.5 billion euro was spent in the form of untargeted fuel tax relief. In contrast, income support measures have been targeted. For example, with the Families First plan, the government provided one-off transfers to low-income households, those with children and pensioners. Although energy price control or tax cuts are quick to implement, they limit the incentive to save energy or switch away from fossil fuels. This is reflected in the increase in road fuel consumption in 2022. Price support measures are also costly to the budget, while public finances are already strained. So what the report says is that Portugal should shift to targeted income support measures to protect vulnerable groups, while encouraging energy saving and fuel switching. So here is a selection of the report's recommendations, many related to the response to the energy crisis. Portugal should make the most of EU funds to support a green recovery. First, by accelerating investments that will reduce energy demand, improving energy efficiency of buildings, and developing public transport. Portugal should align economic incentives to climate targets. The country has committed to phase out fossil fuel subsidies by 2030 in the climate law, and it should set clear milestones to reach this target. But it should also continue to protect vulnerable groups by shifting from energy price control to targeted income support measures uncorrelated to energy consumption. The report highlights other opportunities to enhance policy coherence, notably in the agriculture and transport sectors. I am interested to hear the informed perspectives of the following speakers. So I thank you very much, and I hope the report will stimulate discussion among you who are familiar with environmental reality in Portugal. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, Frederic.
Thank you very much, Frederic. From Frederick's intervention, there is an action verb which is very much mentioned by the minister, accelerating. So amongst these three last takeaways given to us by Frederic, these are very important to three of us, but an appropriate use of EU resources and funds is something we greatly need, and we are all very invested in it. And without further ado, it is an honor to have the President of the Council for Sustainable Development, Filipe Duarte Santos. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank the invitation for being here, and I'd like to greet the dear Minister, the dear Mayor, all the other present entities and representatives. This report is certainly something that represents an encouragement, a stimulus to the country, to the people, to all of us. And we should reflect on it and look at the recommendations issued in a positive manner, because they are certainly very important. I would begin by saying a few words about an issue which in all the other speeches featured firstly the issue of the economy. So the sustainable development involving an environmental, social, and economic perspective. What has been said today and highlighted, and what's also been said in the last few decades, Portugal has had an economic growth, it is true, but not very robust. And this is essentially due to low productivity of the labor force. This is a reality of our country. This is obviously related to low wages and low skills. This is something that generates vulnerabilities, which are then accentuated by external public and private debt in a context of low growth, in the context of the economy. The solutions involve increasing professional skills in order to strengthen productivity, increase the ability to attract foreign investment, fostering the creation of jobs, economic prosperity and well-being. Regarding the pandemic, Frederick referred this context. It obviously had a very significant impact on our economy, but nevertheless, there has been a very positive recovery, I would say, from an economic and social point of view. Regarding other countries, if we compare, it's been quite successful. The challenge we have ahead in the context of the Ukraine invasion by Russia makes things more difficult, because it involves all the issues around inflation and also interest rates. So this aspect of the growth of expenses with interest rates is a very important budgetary challenge for this year and the next few years. So the question is, how in this context will it be possible to budget environmental protection, particularly with the energetic transition, which I think the OECD report recognizes that the evolution has been very positive in the context of the European countries, and also what's considered in OECD reports as peers, similar countries, culturally speaking, Southern European countries. So in comparison, comparatively, our evolution and progress have been very good, which I think should make Portugal proud. So, however, the assessment is different regarding the impacts we're suffering arising from climate change and adapting to climate change. So the issues of water use efficiency is something very strongly highlighted in the report. There is a lot of work that needs to be done. The minister mentioned that a set of important measures are being implemented. Also, the issue of wildfires, I will be touching on this, and the development of a regenerative agriculture compatible with water management, biodiversity. And I'd like to take this opportunity to mention that in the National Environment Council, after many years of great effort, it has been possible to form a working group about nexus, the link between farming, water, and biodiversity, because there are advisors representing the sectors, but the dialogue hasn't been very easy. Well, it's not easy amongst countries, between ministries, the agriculture sector, the water sector, not only in Portugal. I think this is a problem which affects many countries and sectors. But it's been possible to form this group. There's been a very healthy, honest dialogue, and we hope that the report of this work group will be published very soon. I would like now to mention very briefly some aspects of these challenges which the country faces, which are also related to the financial availability to solve these problems. This is something we need to take into account. So I would start with an issue which is not very touched upon, the issue of the coastal erosion. This is very strong, particularly on the western coast, in the areas which are marked in red. So from the estuary of the Minho River until Nazaré is particularly problematic in the European context. Our coasts at this latitude, it's one of the most energetic ones worldwide. And this is why we have such great waves. This is why we have such magnificent surf. But it means there is a constant power discharge upon our coast, which is very, very strong. So please notice, this is estimated, and this is provided by the Portuguese Environment Agency, all from institutional sources. So the Portuguese Environment Agency estimates in the last 63 years, we've lost 13.3 square kilometers of coast. Just to have an idea, Portugal is a country with a long history. This is more than 1/3 of the area of a territory like Macau. So territory holds value. So Macau has a GDP, which is 1/6 of the Portuguese GDP. So a territory, a mass of land, holds values. So therefore, this is a loss and an extreme situation. How is the coastal protection done in these areas? Well, it's done thanks to European funds. There is no line in the national budget which is specifically devoted to coastal erosion. This results from a deficit in sediment transported by rivers, especially the Douro River. This is where the problem lies, a lack of sediments. And additionally, there is a rise in the sea level, but this sea level rise has also only been of 20 centimeters. So this is the sea level rise since the year 2000, and these are future projections. According to the Treaty of Paris, they are of about 40 centimeters, according to the most severe scenarios of 80 centimeters. This is from 2000 on to the future. This has to do with erosion, not climate change. And here, this is where the problem lies. So there's Furadouro, which is south of Porto, Cortegaça. These are very interesting, pleasant places with a very strong tourism development, but they need to be protected. If that doesn't happen, then the coast will regress and there will be this more pronounced arch. So the difference between the frontal part of these settlements and the yellow line is how much there's been a regression. So it allows us to see if these settlements didn't exist, the regression will be even stronger. So we need to understand this. So this is a photo I took in Portugal. I was there a few years ago. It's for the launching of a project. This is a beach. So this is a beach, but since it's north-facing and the coast is not regressing because of these infrastructures. This is another problem we need to take into account seriously. And the Portuguese people should know about this. I speak in general terms, but this is very important. This is data coming from ICNF, official data again. And this is the dryness index from 1960 to 1990, and then from 1980 to 2010. And if you look at that area of semi-arid area and how much it's growing, the orange area, this has an impact on all activities. So water is at the base of all economic, human, and social activity. So this is something we need to think in terms of farming, water resources for the population, and biodiversity. So there is a lot of implications in terms of changes in the existing biodiversity. Even scarier if we compare the period between 1980 and 2010 with 2000 and 2010. And if you take a good look in the last 10 years, if you see the progression and the spread of the semi-arid area. So this is the reality official data, which show what's happening and gives us an idea of the implications on different sectors and economic activity. Also, some additional data. This is a very interesting initiative by the government, by APA, of conducting an assessment of the current and future water availability and the aridity dryness index. There is a reduction in the water flow of rivers with a comparison of 2 consecutive periods of 35 years. If we can see, there are 16%, 25%. My last point is on wildfires or the risk of wildfires. It's been highlighted this morning. This is a very important aspect, and we need structural reforms in order to solve this. This is what happened in 2022. I'm sharing data from the European Union by the European Forest Fire Information, EFIS, and what is shown here in terms of the burnt area in 2022, Spain is at the top. So with 2 million CO2 tons of CO2, with a very strong financial cost, 3 billion euros. Portugal in third in this list. In terms of the burnt area, in terms of the percentage according to the area of the country, we can see here that Portugal here leads with 1.13% of burnt area. Then Romania with 0.63, and then Spain with 0.58, and so on. But the scarier is the third graph I'd like to show. So this is a comparison, what happened in 2022 with the average of the last 15 years. This is what appears in the third column in red. While in Spain, what burned last year in terms of percentage of country area burned was 4 times higher. In Romania was 10 times higher. In Portugal was 1.1. So the average of these 15 years, what indeed happened in the last year, despite this high figure. The last slide, there is a positive aspect. This is an excerpt taken from a recent text by the directing board for the Agency for the Integrated Management of Rural Fire, by its president, Tiago Oliveira. He's an engineer with a PhD, with a vast experience, very strong skills. And this is what he describes. now the fire is in the relationship between communities and vegetation. It is a tool of two complementary axes, one that minimizes human loss and material loss, and the other devoted to reducing the severity of the damage of wildfires on the forest. So on the one hand, there is the intention of reducing the impact on people, the victims, which were very, very severe in 2017, as we all know, and the other is forest itself. These are two aspects which require different trainings, different specializations. There was a great achievement, great progress since 2017 on the first aspect. We haven't had casualties, villages haven't burned, people haven't died, but now we need to take the next step, saving the forest. And there is a great deal of work we need to do. I would just like to make a comment. We've spoken at length about the difficulties, the obstacles in decreasing the burned area every year. The percentage of the country area that burns, one has to do with the fact that forest is mostly private and fragmented. As the minister referred, used the word atomization of the forest. What happens is that we have this tracking, this Reddit, but according to the OECD report, 20% of the forest has unknown landowners. So this is a structural issue, the problem of indivisive inheritance. This is something that doesn't exist in most of Europe. After 2 years, if families do not divide what is inherited from parents or grandparents, then the state will appropriate this inheritance. So without doing this, we will not know, because people are in the US or Brazil or France, they may be immigrants. So without this structural reform, which will be difficult because we've been used to this for centuries, we need to do these structural, deep reforms, and this would help to solve the problem. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muito obrigada, professor Filipe Duarte Santos.
Thank you very much for bringing your reflections and the emphasis of the challenges we have ahead for the next years or for the next 10 years. You mentioned erosion, wildfires, forest management. We have to concentrate ourselves in these so important areas. Now I have the privilege and the honor to pass on the floor to Professor Alexandra Aragão, professor at the Faculty of Law of the University of Coimbra. We will be listening to you very attentively.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you for the invitation. Good afternoon, everyone. Special greetings for the Minister for the Environment and Climate Action, Secretary of State, representatives from different ministries. My greetings for the Mayor and also to General Director of the Environmental Division of OECD and Head of Division here present. In addition to my panelists. So the time is short, and even if I am optimistic, we should focus the less positive dimensions of the submitted report. Portugal has had a very good performance in some things. We should maintain those. In other aspects, that performance has not been so good. So what we should do is to answer the challenge of Mrs. Director John Tyndall, that we should look constructively to this report and also to think about solutions for the indicators in which we are less well represented in the report. Within this approach, constructive approach, what I bring here is not statistical data, because we have had a lot of statistics. The report is an evidence-based report. We already have many data, but now we need to prepare a diagnosis. the environmental and economic crisis in Portugal, how Portugal has faced during the COVID and war crisis, how have we been facing environmental and economic challenges? Or we will have to think about the reasons, not the symptoms. So I would like to invite you to do this brainstorming for us to go further and to understand why things didn't happen so positively as released by the OECD report. The first reason for our low performance rate lies in the fact that we look to the environmental demands, namely the environmental impact studies and other demands, as mere formal obligations or obstacles to the investments that have to be overcome wisely. So this evaluation is seen as a checklist, something that has to be enforced, otherwise the funds will not be given, and given the new demands, given not to cause significant losses. Well, this leads to the fact that we will have contracts, agreements, and partnerships signed with municipality where people commit to distribute funds before the study is provided. This is what I would like to show you. First, we do the agreement to fund allocation, and then we do the environmental impact study, which can raise some doubts regarding the project's environmental compatibility, a declaration of favorable or condition environmental impact, and then the potential interest of the project, allowing us to have the green light to go ahead. This is the first weak point. And what I underline here is not a Portuguese exclusive reality. Unfortunately, in other countries, this also happens. This characterization is transversal to other countries as well. But since we have always been a good student in Europe, we are to overcome this idea that the report is a checklist. The second idea is the fact that we recognize that we are under a climate emergency situation. There is a need to take timely measures in order to face environmental problems, not only climate but also biodiversity. But we also have another urgency, an urgency to use the funds. And this sometimes leads to some rush decisions, and we have to be able to manage this urgency regarding our RP funds and other funds that have been allocated to the development of Portugal, be it in transportation, in the industry, from the environmental point of view, for the use of funds to environmental management projects. So we have two urgencies, and the urgency to use the funds sometimes leads to some failures. The third reason for our low environmental performance has to do with climate myopia. We are really hard to be able to look long term. We only can see the problems that we already have now. We hardly think long term. So we have some decisions that make some economic models feasible, but they are not compatible with climate agenda, such as intensive farming projects that are being approved in Portugal with some water pressure problems. The left-hand side image aims to show this. We can see and know the situation of our dams and rivers, and also decisions that allow to bring down autochthonous trees, which are quite important for carbon, to replace with photovoltaic parks. So people are not following a long-term vision. They see a short-term policy. So weak side is what I see here. Well, another reason is the difficulty Portugal has to accept that the environment has a cost, and this cost has to be paid. Of course, we know our economic difficulties. Citizens have been affected by the crisis. Also, the companies also felt this crisis very hardly. So we cannot accept the increase in prices in water, energy management, waste management costs. So we have economic difficulties, and this system of incentives cannot widely be used in Portugal. And the answer here is that we always have to have some careful attitudes, because we cannot increase costs to the companies, because they are already living in a difficult situation, and the families also have a poor energy affordability. So I underline these two sectors, waste and water, because these two sectors have low performance rates. Well, the aim is to tell you that we have to be imaginative, to have wise and smart projects, as said by the minister and also suggested by the OECD report. Payment for ecosystem services, for instance, she also reinforced the minister also reinforced the carbon approach. These have already been focused in other contexts, but we go even further and to think about other methods, not to neglect the funds that we already have available, for us to be really a good example in the Portuguese transition policy. I know the time is short, so that's it. Thank you very much for your attention.
Professora Alexandra Aragão, muito.
Thank you very much, Professor Alexandra Aragão, for your inspiring speech and testimony. So, in fact, we couldn't have had a better conclusion to this appeal to imagination and creativity. Is indeed something very strong, something that we at the Ministry of Environment feel every day. So that's it. We've reached the end of our session. I'd like to thank once again the table and our speakers. So I'm being told that if you have any question, we still have time. Our speakers behave excellently, so we've managed to recover some of our delay. So if you have any questions, please go ahead. I don't think so. So I'd like to conclude by thanking once again to our invitees, our dear honored guests, the OECD team. Thank you very, very much for this exercise. It's been an excellent exercise for us. These are excellent learned lessons you're giving us. This is a mantra for the next few years in order to win the identified challenges and also the non-identified ones, because the last few years have shown us that we go from crisis to crisis, from extreme event to extreme event. Portugal has enormous challenges like other countries. We also have European funds available and the means to overcome. So we are sure we are on the right track. This is the message of this report, and it's very positive in terms of having a good environmental behavior and to identify the weaknesses we need to tackle. Thank you once again also to the Sintra municipality for hosting us, the mayor and his team. Thank you to all of you who've been here with us today and those who participated in this exercise. It's been for the Ministry of the Environment a privilege to coordinate you. It's very easy when people are all aligned towards the same objective. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Minhas senhoras e meus senhores.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now closing the session. Thank you very much.